In the early 80s, the glam metal scene exploded with flashy outfits and catchy tunes. One band emerged from the shadows, ready to set the world on fire, literally and figuratively. This is the story of W.A.S.P, a band that defied the norms and paid the price. So back in 1984, heavy metal bands were becoming more popular. You had the classic metal bands like Judas, Priest, and Iron Maiden, which had gained an underground following over the years. You had this new wave of glam metal bands that were taking over the mainstream. I'm talking about Def Leppard, Riot, Twisted Sister, and Bon Jovi. Then you had W.A.S.P. They were something else. They were heavy enough to be heavy metal, shocking enough to be shock rock, but the songs were almost radio friendly, but too shocking to be accepted by the mainstream. They caught the attention of the PMRC and had shocking album covers. In this video, I will be talking about the debut album by the band W.A.S.P and how it defined genres. The origins of W.A.S.P begin back in 1979 with a band called Circus Circus. The band had Blackie Lawless and Randy Piper, but a few years later, in 1982, Blackie and Randy formed W.A.S.P, which also featured Rick Fox and Tony Richards. Rick Fox eventually left and Chris Holmes joined the band. The band had a very explicit stage show. Blackie Lawless was known for tying semi-naked models to a torture rack, and they also threw meat into the audience. Keep in mind, this was not the first time a band was doing shock rock. We know Alice Cooper was doing it for a long time, and he had a pretty theatrical stage show. You could say the same about the band Kiss, but this was a whole other level. It was horror, but they touched upon this darker subject matter. And also keep in mind, it's 1984. Metal is starting to become popular. It was around that time Quiet Riot had two major label albums out, which were Mental Health and Condition Critical. And they were in the mainstream. Def Leppard had Pyromania out, and they were very popular. The band Rat had their album out. They were popular. And the same can be said for Twisted Sister, Stay Hungry, which had two songs on MTV. And then there was Motley Crue, a band that could be compared to W.A.S.P, but at that point in time, their current album was Shout at the Devil. I think W.A.S.P even took what Motley Crue did and dialed it up a little more. And this brings us to the release of their self-titled debut album. The self-titled debut album was released on August 17, 1984. It is now celebrating 40 years. Like I said in the beginning, it was not a glam metal album, but there were elements of glam as well as traditional heavy metal and some speed metal. So they were kind of doing their own thing. They were the only band at the time that fell somewhere in the middle of the heavy metal spectrum. So for example, the opening track was I Want to Be Somebody. And that song had the typical lyrical content about wanting to become a rock star or just wanting to become a better version of yourself. This was a fast-paced song, and the guitar playing was probably closer to Iron Maiden than one of the bands I mentioned in the last chapter. They had a guitar tone that could be compared to the band Judas Priest, but at the same time, it was a catchy type of song. Then there's a track, Love Machine, and this one had some more explicit lyrics. They were about sexual domination and the rock and roll lifestyle, but again, the chorus was very memorable. The song might have some of Blackie Lawless's best vocals on the whole album, and it has some really awesome bass playing that can also be compared to Iron Maiden. Now, the album is not a perfect album. There are a few weak tracks. So, for example, the track The Flame was probably closer to glam rock or glam metal, and the same could be said for the song School Days, which was another cheesy song about being in school. But what's interesting about that one, it sounds like a mix of Twisted Sister and Alice Cooper. And I thought about that for a while, and I thought about the song they did called Be Cruel to Your School. That was by Twisted Sister, and it came out in 1985 on their album Come Out and Play. So you could even say that Twisted Sister were influenced by W.A.S.P. But the album also has some really heavy stuff. For example, the track Hellion has some lyrics that sounds like something that would come off of a Venom album, and it moves into some speed metal territory as well. Same can be said for the track On Your Knees, which is another one with some great riffs and elements of speed metal. The last two songs are The Tormentor and The Torture Never Stops. Both of these songs have the same lyrical content about being tortured. Even the song The Tormentor has sound effects of the rattle of chains, and both of these songs were more comparable to the heavy metal bands of the time, which would be Iron Maiden, Judas Priest, and even the band Accept. Another interesting note is the song Tormentor was featured in 2 horror movies at that time. They were called The Dungeon Master from 1984, and the other one came out later called Terror Vision from 1986. There was one song I failed to mention, and that is Sleeping in the Fire. This was one of the best metal ballads of the 80s. It has melodic guitar work by Chris Holmes and some haunting vocals by Blackie Lawless. Chris Holmes also has a very bluesy guitar solo, and there's some acoustic guitars in the song. Blackie Lawless shows that he can do softer vocals in the verse and has some powerful vocals in the chorus. I'll be comparing them to some other bands later on. But first, let's discuss one of the most controversial songs and the censorship and controversy surrounding it. Their debut single was called Animal F Like a Beast, and this cover of the single was shocking. It showed a circular saw blade between a woman's legs, and you could see blood on her fingers and her lower abdomen. It was intended to be on their debut album, but Capitol Records didn't want the album to be banned by major retail chains, so it was not included on the album. The song was later included on the 1998 reissue. At first, the single was going to be released only in Europe in a black plastic bag with a warning sticker, but the single eventually was released through its original artwork. I remember seeing this album in a record store, and I was a teenager. I was maybe like 17 years old, and it was around 1988, and it was very shocking to me, being that I was young. But this song would later be part of the Filthy 15, a list made by the PMRC comprising 15 songs that were deemed to be offensive. According to Blackie Lawless, there was a story going around at the time that Tipper Gore, the founding member of the PMRC, was walking in her house, and one day she heard her 12-year-old son listen to W.A.S.P's Animal song, and she completely lost her mind after that. He also said it might not be true, but that was what was going around at the time. Blackie Lawless also said in the interview that all this controversy made him more of a recluse. He received death threats, bomb scares, and he even got shot at a few times. So he said it was out of control, and it has affected him even to this day. Now, it can be argued that the band W.A.S.P had a sound similar to the glam metal bands of the time. But are they really a glam metal band? So I would say no, but let's analyze it a little more. W.A.S.P was not the heaviest band that was out at the time. I would say that would go to bands like Metallica, Slayer, or Anthrax, and they all had their debut albums out by that time. Now, we're not here to compare W.A.S.P to thrash bands, although I did mention a few songs that were close to speed metal. But W.A.S.P were not the darkest or most evil sounding band out there either, and that would probably go to a band like Merciful Fate, and they had their debut album out, and they had another one on the way, which would actually come 1 month after the release of this one, and that's called Don't Break the Oath. So I would say they came close to matching the darkness of Merciful Fate, but with music that was easier to listen to. I would say they were a little similar to Twisted Sister, but W.A.S.P were a lot more shocking. Twisted Sister liked to play it safe, and they were almost a comedy band. But as for the other glam metal bands, which were Def Leppard, Quiet Riot, and Riot, there's really no comparison. W.A.S.P were a whole other level. So I think people in general noticed that W.A.S.P had a sound that was closer to some of the bands I mentioned, like maybe Twisted Sister, but in image, closer to Merciful Fate. And that scared people to think, like, what would happen, or what would happen to their kids if W.A.S.P reached the heights that Quiet Riot or Def Leppard did around that time. But we all know the answer. You know, the kids turned out fine. Most of us watching this are those kids. You know, I'm one of them. I listened to this stuff when I was like 15, 16, and we all turned out fine, more or less. So I'll be honest with you, I didn't listen to this when it came out, but I bought the next 3 albums, and they were Inside the Electric Circus, The Last Command, and The Headless Children, and the latter of which I did a video of not too long ago, and I'll link that one in a few minutes. But I think this band holds a special place because it bridges the gap between all these metal genres that were going on at the time. They were their own class. I've heard people say W.A.S.P is a glam metal band, but they're the heaviest of the glam metal bands, if you can call it that. But they were doing their own thing, so that's what I think. W.A.S.P is just W.A.S.P. They're not the type of band you want to put into a category or a subgenre. They're just who they are, and that's my answer to everything we talked about in this video. So please check out my video of The Headless Children. I'll stick that right there. Please like this video. It helps me with the YouTube algorithm. Please subscribe if you're not already. I do rock and metal reviews, rankings, and more. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.